I hope everyone's having a good day. You doing good? I hope everyone's having a good Friday. I got some doozies for you guys. I say doozies. I really don't know. I'm gonna be going in blind, just like the rest of you. But yes, I hope everyone's ready. I'm excited. We're gonna jump into this. All right. Just getting my playlist ready. All right. I hope you guys are ready. We're gonna get started. Aw, thanks. All right, here we go. The first story is called Where the Birches Lean. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. It was the last week of school before Christmas break. That meant that the students and teachers of Ridgecrest Christian Preparatory Academy had little intention of actually working. Most classes had become a social hour, but Mr. Winthrop had decided to take this opportunity to give his senior English class a writing assignment. He requested that each student write a 2-page essay detailing their holiday traditions. The class groaned in their displeasure, all of them except the golden boy, Jeremy Bascom. Jeremy was perfect. Perfect blonde hair, blue eyes, and a pearly white smile. The kind of boy you wanted your daughter to date. Jeremy would credit this to being a perfectly made by his Lord and Savior. His one annoying quality was the need to remind everyone of his faith and the pitfalls of anyone who did not believe in it. Jeremy and his small group of like-minded friends were quick to correct anyone who thought different and enjoyed any opportunity to spread the message of their faith. He was a walking and talking reminder of what it meant to be Christian. Everything about him showed it, all the way down to the golden cross that was permanently pinned to his polo shirts. So, when given the task of writing about the reason for the season, Jeremy was more than enthused. He did have one question, however. What should those of us write about who do not celebrate Christmas? Jeremy remarked while glaring across the room toward the pale and dark-haired girl in the corner of the room. Emma Campbell responded with a sneer and a raised middle finger. It was no secret that Emma did not believe in God, but teenage rumors had spread that she practiced the dark arts of witchcraft. The truth was, the only thing Emma knew of spells and magic were the stories her grandmother had told her of the old days in Scotland. As a child, she would sit, her green eyes wide as her ancestor told of the Druids performing rituals to summon the power of their gods. Her favorite was one of Justice, a humble servant saved from torture by the power of the gods, having turned their assailant into a simple birch tree. She would beg her grandmother to tell the story each time. Her grandmother would assure her that the place full of birches were real. Emma had never actually witnessed magic, though. It was only day-to-day rituals that her mother still performed out of habit. There was always incense burning and a blessing before the day would begin, the type of thing that was hardly any different than lighting a candle or saying a prayer. The only reason Emma even attended a Christian school was the academic benefit it afforded. She contemplated her grandmother's many stories and began writing. If Mr. W. wanted to know about tradition, she would write about the winter solstice as she had been taught. Mr. Winthrop had to calm the chuckles of his class before answering. Everyone has traditions, not just Christians, and I am interested in reading about all of them. So please, give me your best work. When the bell rang to signal the end of the period, the room went from silent scribbling noise to a clamor of shuffling seats. Mr. Winthrop raised his voice in an attempt to remind them all that the assignment would be due before each of them left for the holidays. Few of them were paying any attention, however. Emma was the last to exit the room, much like always, and quietly navigated between the hordes of teenagers within the hall. When she approached her locker, Jeremy Bascom and his goons had congregated around it. She sighed, knowing that she would have to endure a lecture to gain access to her belongings. Jeremy's smirk made her sick, despite how perfect his teeth were. "Please, just let me get to my locker," Emma begged. Jeremy leaned forward. "First, let me see what you are writing for Mr. W.'s class." Emma's eyes rolled as she felt her notebook pull free from her hands. She yelled for it to be returned, but the group had quickly surrounded Jeremy. They hovered over the pages and read about a celebration of the winter solstice, a joyous time of giving, decoration, and feast. Emma had been taught long ago that many of the Christian traditions had been borrowed from pagan ones and adapted to form what we know as Christmas. She watched as Jeremy's face changed from amusement to anger with each passing word. Emma knew that within Jeremy's mind she was a sinner, a blasphemer, and doomed to the pits of hell. She could even see it in his eyes when he finally looked at her. "God does not like it when we spread lies, especially about him," Jeremy said as he began tearing the pages from Emma's notebook. Emma's voice roared. "They aren't lies. They are stories my grandmother used to tell me." The girl refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. She held strong to the tears that wished to flow from her eyes as her notebook was shoved back into her hands. This was something Emma had become accustomed to. The group dispersed as the next bell rang, and though she should have made her way to class, her heart was no longer in it. Instead, she made her way to the restroom and sat within a stall to release her sorrow drop by drop into her palms. In that tiny space, she found herself beseeching the gods of her grandmother to save her from this pain. Emma hoped that the god of revenge, Arawan, would come swooping in and teach Jeremy Bascom a lesson. That night, Emma's sleep was restless. Her mind was still filled with the tortures of the day and wishes of a solution. It took her hours to find peace, but once she had, she also found dreams. She found herself walking among stark white birch trees. A pale blue gown of cotton and lace draped over her thin frame, and lilies sat like a crown upon her head. The air was warm and sweet, and the birds chirped overhead, and the wind played a tune that reminded her of the music her grandmother used to play. Soon she found herself amidst a clearing, and within the center sat two ghostly-looking hounds with bright red ears. They sat intent, watching as she approached them and made no movement toward her. From beyond the trees, a figure appeared in black. A hood covered scattered strands of gray as the person hobbled upon a cane toward the clearing. As the person stopped beside the dogs, a frail and withered hand pushed back the hood to reveal the wrinkled and worn face of an old crone. Her eyes were glassy, much like that of the sightless, but she stared intently at Emma as if she were peering into her very soul. The woman gave a gentle smile and reached out her hand to brush at Emma's cheek. The woman's smell was of fresh grass, and the sensation was calming. She felt like a child again, being soothed by her grandmother when she was in pain. "Oh, young one, do not despair. We see you," the woman spoke softly. A tear rolled from one of Emma's eyes as she spoke. "Who are you?" "A friend of your family, dearie," the woman replied. "You may call me Matilda." "Is this the place my grandmother told me about?" Emma whispered. Matilda nodded. "This place is full of magic, and if you believe, you will witness it." And with those words, small specks of light erupted from the flowers beneath Emma's feet. They danced within the air around her body, and a sound like tiny voices singing echoed in her ears. It was soft and soothing like a lullaby. Her eyes began to flutter, and her knees became weak. Emma knelt within the soft grass and found herself laying down within the poppies. The sweet smell of the flowers, the calming song, and the comforting ground beneath her lulled her to sleep. Her body lay still while the old crone and her hounds disappeared into the birches beyond the clearing, humming a tune from a time long since past. Emma did not stir the rest of the night, and a smile rested on her lips. The following day, Emma felt rejuvenated. It was almost as if every weight of the world she lived in had been lifted from her shoulders. There was even a sparkle in those emerald eyes, a light that not even the heckling from Jeremy and his friends could dim. Their laughter faded into the distance as she thought about her dream. It left the group confused, especially Jeremy. A seed of curiosity was planted at that moment. Jeremy had to know why Emma seemed so at peace. Before he had completely thought about his actions, his feet were moving. He picked up the pace until he was walking in stride with Emma. "What's got you in such good mood?" he quizzed. Emma smirked. "Wouldn't you like to know?" She disappeared into her biology class, and when Jeremy followed, Mrs. Simmons stopped him and questioned if he might be lost. Jeremy did not share this class with Emma. As she took her seat, she gave a slight giggle at the sight of the boy being escorted from the room. Even if Jeremy had not properly received his punishment for being so cruel, it was good enough to improve Emma's mood. Her notebook was filled with doodles of dancing fairies, flowers, and rows of birch trees. She could not get the image of her dream out of her head, and just thinking of Matilda made her smile, and something about that upset Jeremy. He could not get Emma out of his head. Emma's smile was like an itch Jeremy could not scratch. He was distracted by it for the rest of the day and during his evening meal with his family. Normally, he was enthusiastic about sharing the events of school with his father and mother, but tonight he asked to be excused early. Jeremy changed for bed, hoping that a good night's rest would ease his inner turmoil, but as soon as he shut his eyes, Emma's face awaited him. Her wavy brown hair, sparkling green eyes, and supple pink lips haunted him. He tossed and turned, adjusted his pillows, and fought with his own imagination for hours before finally finding sleep. His mind could not let go of the image, and it slowly crept its way into his dreams. Jeremy awoke laying in a bed of grass surrounded by poppies. The cool night air whipped through the birch trees that circled the clearing, and the only light was that of the moon above. He brought his body up slightly, resting his weight on his elbows. From the forest beyond a form approached. As the thin figure stepped out into the moonlight, he recognized Emma's face. She slowly approached him, grasping hold of the hem of her pale blue gown. She knelt beside him and whispered his name. He stared at her mouth, noticing how red and plump they seemed, almost like an apple. She leaned down, pressing those very lips against his, and he could not resist pressing back into her loving kiss. He could hear singing echo through the trees around him, and specks of light danced around them, shining like tiny stars. It was magical. He felt her hand trail down his body, then come to rest between his legs. His eyes widened as her palm rubbed at the cloth that separated their skin. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but it felt so good. His body reacted in kind, his manhood growing firm under her touch. She smiled at the sensation, then leaned back, retracting her hand in order to pull gently at the bindings that held her gown in place. The cloth lowered to reveal her naked form beneath. Jeremy's mouth hung agape as his eyes trailed her perky breasts and smooth skin. He had never witnessed the female body before, and his excitement only grew. The beautiful young woman before him pulled down upon his pants, revealing his rigidness before taking him inside her. Her body rocked slowly atop his lap, gasping in pleasure. Jeremy laid back upon the soft grass and moaned with every motion. Within moments, he could no longer hold in his ecstasy and released himself inside of her. Emma came to an abrupt halt, and she felt his fluids fill her. Her smile slowly crooked into a smirk as she lifted her pale form off of him. She pulled her gown back up over her shoulders and bound the strap. She bent slightly, kissing Jeremy on his forehead before pressing her index finger to her lips as if telling him to keep this a secret. Then, just as quickly as she had arrived, she disappeared into the birches. Jeremy was left soaked in his own sweat and juices in the middle of the clearing. He jerked awake to find himself still in his bed. It had all been a dream. He spent the next few moments asking forgiveness for his lustful thoughts and prayed for the strength to ignore them if they were to return. Emma's smile failed to leave her as the rest of the week progressed, and it tortured Jeremy to no end. Every time his eyes fell upon her, all he could think of was his dream and being inside her. He prayed more in the days that followed than he had ever before. He prayed for relief from the torment, but it did not come. When he could stand it no longer, he found his way to Emma's locker and waited. When she arrived to retrieve her things at the end of the day, Jeremy stood tapping his foot impatiently. His hair was a mess, his eyes were dark, and almost resembled an addict that had not had his fix in a few days. "Rough couple of days," she quipped. Jeremy tried to smile. "You could say that." "You mind if I get to my locker?" Emma questioned. Jeremy quickly stepped to the side. "Yeah, sure. So the thing is, I was wondering if you might want to, you know." Emma giggled slightly, listening to the stammering of the boy. "Spit it out. I gotta get going." Jeremy attempted to steel himself, his eyes getting more serious. "Will you go out with me?" Emma could hardly contain her laughter. It erupted from her mouth and echoed through the hallway. She had no words to properly respond. Jeremy attempted to laugh as well, but he could not find humor in his question. He needed her to say yes. He asked again, but she simply ignored the question and closed her locker. Emma made her way down the hall with Jeremy following close behind. Tears formed in his eyes as he began to beg at one point. He even got down on his knees. The sight was truly pathetic, and when it only offered another laugh from Emma's lips, he became angry. He stood abruptly and grabbed her by the arm and demanded she go out on a date with him. "Take your hands off her right now," Mr. Winthrop's voice boomed from down the hall. Jeremy's fingers shot open, releasing his hold on her arm in a second. Emma was shocked at Jeremy's actions, but even more frightened of the look in his eyes. She could see madness behind those eyes. She did not hesitate to step back and head toward the door. Within moments, she was out the door and on her bus. Jeremy was left defeated in the hallway, wondering how he could have been led to this madness. He only had one answer. Emma must have cast a spell on him, and he would have to break it. That was the only way for him to return to sanity and possibly save his soul from damnation. The plot began to form in his head as he exited the building and sat in his car. His tires poured smoke as he peeled out of the parking lot and down the road for home. The next day, Emma had made it a point to avoid Jeremy, which she found to be easy because he had not attended classes that day. She just had to make it until the end of the school, and they would be out for the holidays. She could not help but wonder what had possessed Jeremy to act the way he had, and the thought clouded her mind most of the day. She stared at his empty seat in Mr. Winthrop's class, which the teacher noticed. When the bell rang, he asked Emma to stay behind to question her about the incident, but she had fewer answers than even her teacher. Emma had wanted Jeremy punished for how cruel he had been to her all these years, but now she felt as though it had gone too far. Even as much as she had wanted to see him suffer, she still felt pity for Jeremy. When Emma arrived home, her mother was descending the stairs from the attic. Emma flashed her normal smile and asked what her mother had been doing. Normally, cleaning out the house was safe for springtime, but something had possessed her to bring down some items that had been stored away. Dust filled the air as Emma's mother opened a trunk that held the only remaining items that her grandmother had owned. Several of the books that held those stories Emma remembered from her childhood were piled to one side. The rest were tattered garments, and tucked beneath them was an old white jewelry box. Emma knelt down by the trunk and pulled things from it with her mother. Her eyes widened as she revealed the light blue gown that resembled the one from her dream. Your grandmother loved that dress," Emma's mother beamed. Emma held the garment to her body and noticed it was her size. "Do you think I could keep this?" "I don't see why not. There's no way I'm fitting into that thing," her mother laughed as she opened the jewelry box. Emma went upstairs to try on the dress. She slipped out of the ratty jeans and t-shirt she had become accustomed to wearing to school and slid the soft fabric over her shoulders. She reached behind her and tied the straps in place before stepping over to the full-length mirror by her window. She smiled at the sight, feeling more beautiful than she ever had. At that moment, her mother stepped into the doorway and leaned against the doorframe to admire the lovely young woman her daughter had become. When Emma noticed her mother watching, she gave a laugh and twirled in the gown. Her mother wiped a tear from her eye and revealed what she had found within the jewelry box. It was a silver necklace with a star-shaped pendant. Within the center of the star was what her grandmother used to call a rune. Her mother told her that it was the one piece of jewelry that her grandmother always wore. She thought it protected her, and as Emma's mother placed it around her neck, she hoped it would protect her daughter just the same. The girl took the trinket between her index and thumb, rubbing it gently and thinking of her grandmother's smiling face. A car sat idle across the street. Jeremy Bascom stared from the driver's seat, his eyes intent on the open window of Emma's bedroom. He had watched and she changed into the dress, and it only served to make him angrier. It felt as though he was being tortured little by little, and he was unsure of how much more he could take. He watched and waited as the light of the moon illuminated the night. His eyes were intent on that window until the light went out and he was sure everyone inside would be asleep. He stepped from his car and quietly approached the front yard. Gathering small pebbles in his hand, he prepared to hurl them to Emma's window to get her attention. The sound of tapping caused Emma to stir. She had fallen asleep in her grandmother's gown and felt foolish for still having it on. The tapping came again and caused her to turn to the window. She watched as another small fragment collided with the window pane. She eased from her bed and slowly made her way to the wall. Jeremy was readying another rock when he noticed her face. He smiled and waved from the ground. Emma unlatched the window and eased it open in order to lean out. "Jeremy, what in the heck are you doing here?" she whispered in an annoyed tone. "Sorry if you're coming over so late, but I wanted to apologize for the other day," Jeremy responded, trying to remain quiet as well. Emma rolled her eyes. "Yeah, well, apologize and get out of here." "Come on," Jeremy begged. "At least let me say it face to face." "You keep it up and my parents are going to wake up," she scolded. "And trust me, you do not want my dad to catch you out there." "Just come down and let me say what I need to say and you won't see me again," Jeremy pleaded. "Oh, fine," Emma huffed. "Go around back though. They'll hear me open the front door." Jeremy almost leaped with excitement as he rounded the house and headed towards the back porch. Emma leaned back in and shut the window. As she headed to her door, she looked at herself in the mirror one more time. She grasped her grandmother's pendant and said a little prayer for protection. She hoped that whatever had been watching out for her would continue to do so. She then crept down the stairs and through the kitchen toward her back door. Her eyes scanned the porch but could not see Jeremy. Her fingers slowly disengaged the lock and turned the knob while easing the door open. She called out quietly into the night but received no response. "Jeremy," she hissed, "this isn't funny." As she stepped out onto the porch, she noticed how bright the moon was. "If you don't cut it out, I'm going back inside." Her words were cut short as a cloth-covered hand clamped down across her mouth. A scent of strong chemical engulfed her nose and her head began to spin. Her limbs suddenly felt weak as she fell back into Jeremy's arms. He was speaking to her, but the words were distant and muffled. It was followed by a maddening grin just before everything went black. While unconscious, her grandmother came to her in a vision, whispering softly for her to be strong and to remember the Birches. When Emma came to, she found her mouth bound shut with part of her gown. It had been ripped into pieces and tied firmly across her lips. She tried to scream for help, but the trees around her were unfamiliar. Jeremy had apparently transported her deep into the wooded area behind her house, and at this time of night, no one would hear her. It did not take long for salty specks to stain her cheeks. She had no idea what Jeremy had in store for her, but she knew it could not be good. Jeremy let out a flurry of curses as he stopped dead in his tracks. Emma's eyes scanned the area, hoping that maybe he had seen someone else in the woods. That was when she noticed the stark white row of birches. Jeremy walked forward, avoiding the ghostly trees around him. Within moments, he found himself in the middle of a clearing that was only lit by the full moon above. Poppies scattered across the ground in front of him, and it did not take long for either of them to recognize their location. Emma had never known there to be a place like this in the woods behind her home, but she had not ventured far before. She wondered if the old woman would appear again to save her, but that thought was dashed when Jeremy slung her body to the ground. She tried to yell for help again, but the back of Jeremy's hand silenced her quickly. He searched the area frantically as if looking for something. When he did not find what he was looking for, he turned back to Emma. "What did you do to me?" She tried to respond, but the gag prevented it. At this point, her eyes were swollen from her constant sobbing. Within her head, she was begging for help from anyone or anything that could save her. Jeremy approached wild-eyed as he tugged at his belt buckle. It did not take long for Emma to realize his intention. Jeremy pulled down his pants as she tried to crawl away. In moments, his body was on top of her, and he was pulling at her underwear. She could smell the warm breath bursting from his mouth. Jeremy had been drinking. She wriggled, squirmed, and grasped at Jeremy's face in an attempt to fight him off, but he was simply too strong. She begged for him to stop behind through the gag. "You have warped my mind and perverted it. You have torn me away from my God's grace." Jeremy's saliva scattered across her face as he yelled. "You are an evil and spiteful witch, and it's time you were punished for cursing me with this. You do not deserve to be saved." His voice growled mere inches from Emma's nose. Emma knew that if she did not do something, Jeremy would have his way with her, and there was no telling what he would do after that. She clawed at his face, but received his knuckles in her mouth in return. Her gums spilled crimson liquid across her once pink lips, and she screamed in agony. She tried to hold onto her grandmother's gown as Jeremy began to claw at her breasts. She could feel his hardness press against her, and there was little time left. That was when she felt the pendant around her neck. She grasped it tightly in her hand and shoved it forward. The hard edge of the silver cut a gash above Jeremy's eye. Blood poured from the wound while he cried out in pain. Jeremy stumbled back, holding his head and cursing Emma's name. She crawled backward on her elbows a few feet before removing the gag finally and attempted to get to her feet. She stumbled and watched Jeremy fall back against one of the birch trees. He propped himself up with one hand, the blood from his forehead staining the white bark. The look in his eyes had not left him. His intent was still true. In his mind, he would have Emma, and there was nothing and no one that would stop him. He lurched forward but was drawn back by the hand that rested on the tree. It was stuck, almost as if glued to the wood. Small specks of light rose from the grass and began to dance around the clearing. A song drifted through the wind, and suddenly Emma felt safe. Jeremy's blood continued to flow from his cut, across his neck and down his arm. It almost melded with the bark and began to fade into it. The blood became white and rigid along with his fingers. They both watched as inch by inch his skin turned into wood. When the truth of the situation became clear to Jeremy, he looked back toward Emma, his face no longer full of anger, but instead replaced with fear. Emma's mouth opened, and her voice emitted words of which she had never spoken, and yet she seemed to understand them. It was a dialect that her grandmother would sometimes use when telling her stories. Le kumkat arwen, krid mido drok vneted, and so le an kloban bent sin. "Help me!" he yelled as his arm became one with the tree. Emma simply turned away from the horrible sight and looked toward the path they had taken to enter. The old crone stood at the edge of the birches with her two pale hounds. Her index finger was pressed to her lips as if telling the girl to keep their secret. When Emma looked back, all that remained of Jeremy was his other hand. The fingers were still stretched out for help as the white bark engulfed them. Each digit became small branches of the newly formed tree. It leaned outward from the tree beside it, still trying to flee, but it was no use. The deed was done. The tree was unrecognizable from the other split-formed tree birches in the area. Emma turned and witnessed just how many similar birches encircled the area. She wondered if each one had been someone to cross her family. She looked back in hopes of thanking the old woman for her help, but she and her pets were gone. The fair-skinned girl who escaped a fate worse than death slowly made her way back home as the first snowflakes of winter began to coat the ground. As the months passed, the mystery of Jeremy's disappearance had faded from popular conversation. The authorities assumed he simply ran away. Emma was the only one who knew different. So, when the green sprouts pushed through dead leaves, she made her way to the woods. She hummed a tune from long ago, twirling in the repaired fabric of her grandmother's gown. Fat yellow jackets floated in the warm breeze, and the air smelled of poppies while she skipped through the brush. Her bare feet were cushioned by the soft grass, and her skin was warmed by the springtime air as she found the clearing. Her lips curled into a smile as she found where the birches leaned. She knelt beside the tree and thanked the gods once again. I'm sorry, he totally got what was coming to him. Just saying. All right. That was a doozy. I didn't expect it to go that way, but I'm kind of glad it went that way because fuck that guy. Fuck Jeremy. All right. The next one is called Through the Woods. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. I don't have long left. They're coming for me, and it is only a matter of time before they find me. I'm sitting here in this abandoned shack I found in the woods, using only the shafts of moonlight that's coming through the broken windows to write this. I know that this will be the last chance I get to warn everyone, to tell them to find safety and hide. Hide. I never thought in 1,000 years that I would ever think to use this word for myself. I can barely write this. My hands are shaking so violently. The blood off my fingers is staining the paper as I try to write. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that it has to come to this. That I have to hide like some kind of animal. They're all dead. My friends, my comrades. Jess was the first to go down. They caught her as we were leaving the old mill back in town. I don't know how they found out that we were staying there, but they did. We were packing, taking as much as each of us could carry on our backs. We heard them breaking through the front doors of the mill, their booted steps echoing through the empty building as they ran, looking for us. We grabbed what we had and ran for the roof, but Jess forgot something. A locket or some shit. I told her to leave it. We'd come back for it later, but she couldn't leave it. Jess had told me that That locket was a gift from another life, from a time she would never forget. A lover lost to war. I wasn't surprised that she wouldn't leave it, but I still tried to get her, begged her to come with us, that it wasn't worth it. The others tried to tell her as well, but they were the ones who told me to leave her. They're the ones who told me that we needed to run. It just started to rain as we ran across the roof. We could barely hear those first gunshots over the low rumble of thunder above us. The first screams still echo in my ears. I can hear them as if they were still around me. The screams made my skin crawl, the air filling with the sounds of death. Then, silence. The four of us were scaling down the ladders when the silence filled our ears, a deafening sound. We all stopped. We shouldn't have stopped, but we did. Luke was on the ground already. He was always the fastest out of the five of us. He was looking up at the roof just as we were. Zach was beneath me on the ladder. Abby was above me, frozen as she waited. I should have known she'd have called to the roof for Jeff. She should have never called out for her. We might have gotten away if she hadn't. It was only seconds after Abby had called out that we saw the black figure look over the edge of the roof, and I know my eyes went wide just like the others. That black, menacing figure. I'd heard so many tales of black dogs being omens or black cats, ravens, and crows, but I had never felt as afraid as I had right then when I was staring up at that faceless, black figure that stared back at us. It was Zach that broke the silence finally. He yelled for us to jump and run. We were still halfway up the building on the ladders, and looking down, I remember seeing Luke shouting up at us. I couldn't hear what he was yelling. The gunshots were too loud around us. I didn't get a chance to jump. Zach grabbed my ankle and tugged me hard, forcing me to release the prongs of the ladder. Abby had already jumped off to the side of where she'd been, hurling herself down to the ground below. She'd always been the one to make these kinds of jumps with such precision and beauty. She'd been a dancer once, a long time ago. She landed almost naturally on the ground below, rolling a few feet before standing up and grabbing at Luke, trying to pull him with her, telling him we'd catch up. I felt the ground before I saw it. My body bounced against the hard cement, and I felt my knees and palms scrape against its rough surface. Zach, though, was there with me, grabbing me up and pulling me to my feet. Luke was around us, trying to get us to move. It was all happening so fast. I remember briefly looking back at the mill's roof and seeing 8 black figures now, all of them shooting towards us. But we were faster than they were anticipating. We weren't Jess. We weren't reckless and rushing in blindly like she had. The next thing I knew, the 4 of us were running down the alley between the old general store and the florist. Zach brought me here once. It was one of the only places in this small town that sold our favorite brand of drink. It had been back when I'd first met him, after I wandered into the town. I remember that day like it was yesterday. His dark hair and those violet-colored eyes. He was dashing and polite, but so mysterious. I had been so thirsty from wandering through the woods that surrounded the town, so hungry. I still don't know how the 4 of us managed to get away from the mill, but we knew that it hadn't been without sacrifice. None of us asked about Jess. None of us questioned if she'd catch up or where she could be. It was like all 4 of us knew the answer without asking it aloud. I knew. There was no way that she had gotten out of there alive. They killed her, just like they'd kill us all if they caught us. Luke was the first one to speak as we ran across Main Street, leading us into the old movie theater. He said what we all knew. We had to leave, to run as fast as we could and get out of there. He told us of a sanctuary, a place where we'd all be safe. St. Louis. I'd never been there before, but I knew that it was at least an hour and a half away from the little town of Herman. Zach asked him how we'd possibly make it there, and Luke just told him we'd figure it out. I almost felt as if maybe Luke knew what was to come, but was just too afraid to tell us. Abby was already checking the theater, making sure that we were safe, at least for a few moments. She was the quietest of us all, so she was always the first to volunteer to go scout around if we needed it. When she came back, though, none of us were ready for the look on her face. She had no color on her face, which was saying something due to how light toned she already was. She told us we couldn't stay here, but of course, when Luke asked her why, and she wouldn't answer, he pushed her out of the way and walked into the theater, number 1. I shouldn't have followed. I should have listened to Zach when he told me to stay with Abby. My hand shot to my face immediately after walking into the dark room. I covered my mouth and my nose. The smell of blood was so overwhelming that it made my stomach lurch and turn. At least 15 people, all of them dead. There were bullet casings covered the floor, and the bodies were just thrown across the chairs and in the aisles. Zach told me later that this was where they lured everyone at first, that this was how they got so many of us down so quickly. I still didn't understand what was going on, though, but I was too afraid to ask. Abby came running into the theater room shortly after, telling us we had to leave right then. We didn't question. We didn't need to. Zach ran to the back of the theater, back past the screen, and pushed open the door to the back alley. We ran. We had to. We left our temporary hiding place and ran back out into the rain that was now pouring down from the sky like buckets that were being dumped down upon us. We had to run for the forest to where we had constant cover and safety, but that was at least 8 blocks away in either direction. We were in almost the center of town. Luke thought we should head toward where the bus station was, back on the east side of town. It made the most sense because St. Louis was east of here. But Zach thought that it would be too obvious, that they'd probably be waiting for us and that the roads most likely had roadblocks by now. But it was Abby who thought much differently. She'd been so quiet this entire time, but finally she said we needed to go back for Jess. Zach just looked at her. Luke bluntly said no. Abby, though, wasn't going to settle for that answer. She started to cry, or maybe that was just rain dripping down from her face. She asked what if Jess was still alive or hurt and needed help. The 3 of us knew that we couldn't go back, regardless if she was alive or not, but Abby didn't want to hear it. I begged her to stop getting louder, but soon she was shouting at us, calling us monsters, telling us that this was all our fault. Abby said she was going back by herself, that she was going to go get Jess. She kept backing up, and we were trying to get her to stay, to calm down and think about this. But just as she stepped back to where the side alley of the theater was, her head jerked to the right. An explosion of blood sprang from the left side of her head. She made a sick, groaning sound as if still trying to talk, then just dropped to the ground. I know that I screamed, even though I shouldn't have, because Zach grabbed my arm and pulled me as him and Luke began to run the opposite way down the alley. East it was. I was in shock. I hadn't even heard the gunshot before she fell to the ground. Abby and Jess were the second people I met when I come here. They were in the general store buying the same brand of drinks that Zach was buying me. They were beautiful girls and best friends. They'd been friends since before they could remember, and they were nearly inseparable. In fact, over the past numerous years, I can only recall a handful of times when they'd been away from one another. Jess had been in love with Luke, but Luke liked Abby. Unfortunately, Abby had never gotten over her lost love. We ran down that alley as fast as we could. We didn't even look behind us. We turned down this alley, then that, swerving in and out of the buildings, doing the best that we could to avoid the main streets. We didn't even see another soul until we got to where the bus station was. Herman Station was small, nothing big and glamorous. Just a small outdoor station with kiosks where they sold the tickets. It was quiet there. Luke had expected to find at least a bus or two, since there were normally a couple that were kept there for backup or emergencies. But they were long gone. Apparently, they'd been evacuating for a day or two before now, quietly. It was like they knew who they did and didn't want to save. We would have to run from here and make our way to St. Louis by foot. Luke even grabbed a map from a nearby kiosk just so we knew where we were going and where to avoid. He'd made the trip to St. Louis numerous times, but this would be the first time any of us walked there. We let our guard down, though. We'd finally thought we were free, that we had our way out, and that we were going to get out of there. We'd started walking towards the tree line to the woods, and we didn't bother checking behind us. We were stupid. Luke heard them first. Those heavy combat grade boots slamming against the concrete as they ran. He told us to run, told Zach to keep me safe. They had their guns up and firing before I even knew what was going on. I heard the bullets ricocheting from around us as Zach pulled me by my hand towards the trees. I didn't dare look back at Luke. I could hear the screams again, just like before at the mill. People were dying. Luke was dying. While we were running, I asked Zach what was going on, why this was happening. I thought we had government immunity, that we were safe, that we could live. Zach told me that the immunity was over, that the newest president had thrown out the agreements and had deemed us all a threat to the nation. He called us monsters. He said that we had no reason to be here anymore. Zach told me that we were no longer safe. He said that all we could do was get to St. Louis, where the safe house had been built just in case anything like this had ever happened. From that point to now, sitting in the shack, it's all still a blur. We'd ran for quite a while, then just started walking east. It started to get dark when the sound of helicopters could be heard in the distance. Zach told me not to worry about it, to just keep moving, but I had this overwhelming feeling of dread building up inside of me. We were in the middle of nowhere. I had no idea where we were or which way to go. Zach was leading me every step of the way, and I trusted him just as I always had since the day that I had met him. He was my savior and my protector. He'd recognized me the moment I had entered Herman. He knew that I was someone who would need to be protected. He took me under his wing and did just that. He introduced me to his friends, took me to the mill, showed me what it was like to trust and have friends again. Even now, when his life was on the line, when he knew that if he left me behind, he could save himself, he protected me. He taught me so much over the past numerous years. I didn't know what I would ever do without him. I had relied on him so much that now I didn't want to think about what would happen if we were separated. But we were separated. After hearing those helicopters in the distance, we heard the dogs and the people. The men were loud as they hunted us through the woods, obviously not trying to hide that they were close. It was like a game of cat and mouse to them. The hunters had become the hunted. When they were starting to surround us, Zach hid me in some brush and told me to find the first opening and make a run for it. I didn't want to. I wanted to stay right there and die with him. I stayed long enough to see the start of the fight. They kicked him and punched him, and he took every hit, even though I knew that he could have fought back. He was stalling them. He was saving me. It took every fiber of my being to not call out for him, to scream his name. As I watched them taunt him and stab him, they laughed at him, called him names, and dared him to fight back like the others, but he didn't. He just looked towards where he'd hidden me and closed his eyes. I still don't know how I got out of there, or even when. I just know that I ran the moment they shot that first bullet. I ran for what felt like hours. I ran until my chest burned and my body ached. I ran as fast as I possibly could, putting as much distance as I could between me and them. Now I'm here, hiding. I can hear the helicopters now, far off in the distance. I could try to run for it, but I don't know where I'd go. I am going to fight. I have to. It is in my nature. I've already drank my last bottle of Fangs, and I remember that first bottle Zach ever gave me. The government had created this for us, to sate our hunger so that we didn't have to feed. so we could live with everyone else. We worked, we loved, we laughed, we did just as everyone else did. We made names for ourselves and became citizens. We didn't need to train to hunt. We didn't need to fight. We grew weak and civilized. We weren't monsters. We weren't vampires. We were us. But that's gone now. Abby, Jess, Luke, Zach, they're all gone now. Fangs is gone. We are once again the monsters, the creatures of the darkness. I can hear the dogs now, see the artificial rays from their flashlights and spotlights through the broken windows. The humans have declared war. They intend to eradicate and remove every last one of us. This is war, and I will stand and fight. That was really good. That was really good. And I like how it led up to that. Like, I like how it led up to us finding out that they were vampires and that the hunters were becoming the hunted, becoming the hunters again. That's really fucking cool. I like that a lot. That was really neat. That was really good. Oh, I think my package showed up. It's outside. I got a notification on my phone. Anyway, but yeah, no, that was really cool. That was really cool. I liked that a lot. I liked that a lot. Okay. No, that's heresy, what you just said. Vampires don't sparkle. Who said what? Who said what? Oh. Thank you. Put it on my bed. Thank you. All right. Let's see what we got here. All right. So the next story is called Leviathan. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. Top Secret, United States of America Navy, July 11th, 1980. The contents of this report are for A-level security status only. No portion of this document may be reproduced for any reason. Lower-level security status personnel are not to be made aware of this document, nor is the public. This document may not be transferred into digital format and cannot be transmitted by electronic means. Failure to comply will be seen as an act of treason, punishable by death without standing trial in any form. Submarine codename, Scorpion. Statement, Johnny Davidson, Ensign. Captain Ritter ordered us to turn north to the Arctic Ocean near Greenland to run cold water tests. We were to spend 7 days under the ice before returning to warmer waters in the Atlantic. The purpose of these tests was not revealed to the crew before or after the voyage. At approximately 0400 hours, 077-1980, the alarm sounded that a large unknown object was in the vicinity of the Scorpion. On radar, it appeared larger than any submarine currently in existence anywhere in the world. Captain Ritter ordered us to run silently as we observed the anomaly. It became clear that the anomaly was approaching us. At approximately 0600 hours, we made physical contact. Radar reported that the anomaly had enveloped the Scorpion. Gauges indicated that we were descending deeper under the water. We reached and passed crush depth minutes after we lost control of the submarine, but the submarine showed no effects common with increased pressure on the hull. It appeared in the same condition as the day we departed from port. Radar reported strange objects in the water, nothing that appeared dangerous to us. Ritter canceled the silence. He saw no importance in it. Gauges indicated then that we were ascending to surface level. Once we reached periscope depth, Captain Ritter used the scope to look around. He did not say what he saw, but it was clear that we had surfaced. With the captain's permission, several crew members exited the submarine to explore the area. I did not leave the submarine during this time. Only 2 of the 12-man exploration team returned. They would not speak of their experiences. Soon after, we were pulled back under the water in the reverse of what had happened. When we were finally released, we were alone in our previous position in the Arctic with no trace of the anomaly. 3 days had passed. We returned to port immediately. Statement: Brian Cox, Petty Officer. We went into the Arctic Ocean and under the ice on 07/06/1980 without any issue. The following day, at approximately 0500 hours, radar saw an unidentified underwater object in the vicinity of the Ghost. The UUO made contact with the Scorpion at approximately 0600 hours and dragged the submarine deep. Captain Ritter ordered silent running, but the events prevented the men from carrying out that order. Ritter canceled the order before the submarine reached crush depth. When we began ascending, engineering reported that they weren't able to power the propellers. Once we reached the periscope depth, Captain Ritter looked around. He didn't say what exactly he saw, though he did say, "Jesus Christ, what is this place?" With permission from the captain, a party, including myself, was able to explore the area around the submarine. The unknown place had breathable air, though it was thin and sometimes hard to breathe. Samuels, who had asthma, couldn't do much. It was a humid place, reminiscent of the Gulf of Mexico. It was a place unlike anything I have ever seen. There was foliage that I did not recognize, and the very landscape appeared alien to me. The sky was odd. It did not look like the same space seen from the surface of Earth. I stayed with Samuels when his asthma slowed him down. I spent my time looking at the surrounding foliage as Samuels hid himself in a small cave. The plants were unlike anything I'd ever seen before, though I admit my experience in the towns of Moros didn't make me very worldly. Still, I read National Geographic whenever I could, and none of the green that surrounded our small camp was ever in those pages. What looked almost like a rose bush had the head of a Venus flytrap, which watched us like a snake hunting its prey before finally striking. And the vines that crawled up the rock wall behind me around Samuel shook as if nervous. It all seemed strange to me. After what seemed like an eternity, I saw a Fielding running towards me. He was coming down a hill, and from my position I could see him stumble as he ran, but he always kept his feet under him. I do not know what the others experienced. He was in a panic and ushered me to flee. My regret, Samuels was still alive when I left him, though those vines had moved closer to his hiding hole as though they intended to strangle him. After we returned to the Scorpion, the submarine was dragged back under the water. It was much more violent than our original trip, and when we sunk deep, I could feel the pressure building as if we'd really gone below crush depth. Once released, we were able to return to port. 3 days had passed, though I can't fathom where they had gone. Statement: Corey Fielding, Petty Officer. Captain Ritter ordered us under the Arctic Isles to run drills, though he wasn't specific. He armed the torpedoes, which I thought were dummies, though he seemed confident that they were alive. We made wide turns around the same area as if circling something we couldn't see. Ritter kept a keen eye on us, never retiring to his cabin as would be expected of him. At approximately 0300 hours on 07/07/1980, the Scorpion entered the vicinity of an unknown object. I say that we entered the vicinity because it remained stationary throughout the observation. Scorpion moved into the object's path. Ritter directed us towards it. I feared an imminent collision, but nobody else in the crew appeared to share my nerves. Whatever it was, it dragged the submarine deeper until we passed crushed depth. Despite several attempts, we were unable to get free of the object, like it wrapped itself around us in a tight hold. Only later did I learn that Ritter used the periscope once we were at the appropriate time. And depth, mumbling under his breath. I don't wish to know what he saw or what looked back at him through the scope. With the captain's permission, a small group was formed to explore the unknown area around the Scorpion. The first fact, we could breathe although the air was thinner, like we were at a high altitude. It was also hot, though I could not say humid. I was joined by Cox, Samuels, Nero, O'Connor, Warden, Westbrook, Saluki, Mahoney, Ryder, Yax, and Bishop. Cox and Samuels stopped halfway through on our trip. Samuels complained of asthma, though I've never seen him show any sign of asthma before. I think he feared climbing the hill before us. It was like walking through a wild forest with only a small path to follow. The submarine had risen in what looked like a pond, though oddly the water was frozen into ice. We'd brought the Arctic with us, or so it seemed. I saw several large tentacles wrapped around the hull, holding it in place. It was like an octopus holding a fish, right before consuming it. At the time, I couldn't see anything else of the object holding the submarine. The 10 of us followed the path until we came to a ruined city, like those built by the Mayans. It looked long abandoned. Some humanoid skeletons were visible. I don't want to say human because they weren't over 7 feet tall with thick brows and long limbs. They were some twisted artist's imagination of what we were beneath skin and muscle. We headed toward a high pyramid that seemed to be the center of the city. Like the rest of the city, it looked abandoned, with those strange vines like those where Cox and Samuels had stopped growing up it, reclaiming it for the horrid jungle. We had to climb the steps to a small temple on the apex. It wasn't easy. By the time we finally reached the temple, we were covered in sweat. The walk took us several minutes. Waiting inside was an elderly man. He had wild eyes and was covered in more tattoos than clothing. He spoke some language that I've never heard before and pointed to a balcony. He was in the act of performing an odd dance around a pit of fire, roasting a humanoid being. I was too disgusted to stay in the man's presence, so willingly I followed my comrades onto the balcony. From it, we could see the submarine and the pool, far in the distance, more than 10 miles I don't recall walking. I noticed that the Scorpion seemed free, though the land just east of the pond was destroyed as if something large had passed through that way. The man started saying one word repeatedly, loud and clear so we could understand. I never imagined that he was summoning something. Leviathan, Leviathan, Leviathan. An indescribable horror wrapped itself around the pyramid, opening its jaws near the balcony. Those same octopus tentacles took hold of the stone structure as the wild man poured sand on the flaming pit. In some strange sense of ecstasy, he heaved the corpse before the creature. Its tongue rolled from the gaping abyss like an anaconda, taking the offering, though it was small compared to its girth. I don't think that it was satisfied because the tongue lashed out at Warden, pulled him to the balcony's edge. Before we could react, it pulled him in and swallowed him whole. While the man kept saying Leviathan, the abomination was eating at the seamen one at a time. It bit down on Nero and O'Connor with a large hawkish beak and tossed them into the air before snatching them on their descent. It tried the same trick with Saluki but missed. The doomed man's body crashed the temple's vine-covered stone surface and exploded. I can't describe it any other way. We didn't have weapons, so our only chance was to escape. Yax was grabbed by one of the thing's tentacles. Its hooked suckers impaled him and dropped the dead body in the creature's expectant mouth. When we ran from the temple, it turned his attention to the old man. The crazed man cried out gleefully as the creature's long tongue pulled him in. I wasn't going to stay around any longer to see what else it would do. It let out a roar of anger once we passed from its immediate reach, though I imagine it still could have caught us with one of its larger tentacles. For some reason, it didn't. Maybe it wasn't hungry anymore. At the bottom of the temple waited more humanoids. Uncivilized monkeys wielding wooden spears, they attacked us, maiming several of the men. As the seamen fell to their wounds, which were by no means fatal, the humanoids descended on them and beat them with clubs made from stone. As the grass turned the color of blood, they began crying out, "Leviathan," which made the unspeakable horror turn to them. It swallowed the sacrifices, as well as a few of the humanoids. But it spit their bones back out, knocking a couple of the warriors unconscious. The creature, which I've taken to be Leviathan, had a large head which was mostly a mouth with eyes. It had a snake-like body, and the lower portion of it was split into more than a dozen tentacles longer than the scorpion. 4 of us survived the initial attack by the monkeys, but 3 were taken down by the uncivilized, brutal attacks before we'd reached the relative isolation of the forest. I couldn't see the creature, though in my nightmares I think it chased us. When I reached Cox, I pulled him back to the scorpion. Samuels appeared alive, but decayed like a skeleton. A few vines had grabbed hold of him and were leeching the life from the man. I never looked back to see if we were pursued, though I heard the crashing sound of something large breaking through the trees. I was stunned to see the monster already sliding back into the pond and grabbing the scorpion. It had finished its meal and was returning the cold cylinder to the Arctic. When we reached the submarine, it was pulled back under the water violently and returned to the Arctic Sea. After we had control of the scorpion, Ritter turned us back to port. 3 days had passed during the incident. Further recommendations. The crew of the Scorpion saw things they weren't authorized to witness, violating the code of clearance, forfeiting their lives. The Scorpion is to be decommissioned and destroyed. Pieces are not to be sold or reused in the construction of future submarines or any other vessel. The crew of the Scorpion will be separated, and they will be terminated in whichever ways are most convenient. No U.S. vessel is to enter the region that the Scorpion reported the incident having occurred. Well then. That was a thing. Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. I like a good eldritch horror kind of story, you know what I mean? I volunteer as trivia. Well, I think it ended that way, Jinx, because it was supposed to be like some kind of report. So, yeah, a little jarring. No, it wasn't meant to have survived the trip. That's crazy, isn't it? Telling you, should be fucked up. All right. The next story is Back in 15 Minutes. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. Let me drink some water first. I've been reading nonstop. got the call from Michael Corso just after 7. I was sitting down to watch the next DVD in my Lost Season 2 box set. Fall was blowing in, and I was using all my non-working waking hours trying to watch all the episodes because I just knew the maple trees in the front yard were going to start dropping their leaves. It had already begun. I was just in complete denial. I wish I'd bought that yard cleaner like I'd bragged I was going to. Vacuuming was a lot easier than raking, but I would have to wait until spring to get a good deal on one. I drained my glass of Diet Coke and hit the button. Steve? The voice was familiar, but faded in my head. Hello? Curiosity flooded my head. It's Mike. Can you come over? I had to stop and decide. This wasn't like choosing which shirt to wear or whether to go to Burger King or McDonald's. There was bad blood between us that had turned less venomous over the months. It all had to do with Nicole. Yeah, right now, the smoke monster was going to be in this episode. Evangeline Lilly would be lovely again. Yes, please, this is important, intensive. He liked to pull the thesaurus out of his head when he was nervous. I'd known him long enough to notice that tick. It had gotten me mad enough at him before I became enlightened to know he couldn't control it, like getting intestinal gas. But this had to be serious. He never would have called if it wasn't. I turned off the Blu-ray. Jack and Kate would have to wait. Okay, I'm on the way. I turned on Gansevoort Road and headed toward Bluebird with memories of someone I'd lost. He lost, and I lost. I just got there first. The seal on the tomb was still fresh. She had no burial insurance, and her sister, Rose, had asked if she could be buried in the Oliver family tomb back in the corner of Gansevoort Road Cemetery. It felt awkward. She would be mine in death, and when she wouldn't be mine in life. Rose knew how close we were. She knew that Nicole always knew to trust me many times more than she trusted her husband. The rain had come earlier that day, punctuated the way I felt, leaving small mud puddles here and there. Nicole had been my first in everything. We dated in high school, broke up when college began. She got into Cobleskill and became a fighting tiger. I went to Brockport until my father's stroke. Then I came back to take over the family insurance business. And had gotten back in touch with each other as we both came back home to Wings Falls. After the accident, I learned to go home by Saratoga Road instead of Gansevoort Road. When you come across the bridge from Glens Falls and drive down Main Street, you get that option at the light as you stare into a Stewart's. I chose the one that would not take me past lonely Gansevoort Cemetery. At night, sometimes I thought I could hear her whispering to me as I drove by. A girl always gets what she wants. She loved to declare at the most inopportune moments. When we were at the county fair and I invested $20 to pitch the rings on the bottles so she could get the biggest plush toy. When I was broken from the death of my mom as sophomore in high school, and she threw Ron Burgundy quotes at me until I stopped crying and cracked a smile. Finally, that night she came over, revealing she thought her husband was cheating on her and asked if she could stay here if he was. She reached down and grabbed my hand, shaking her head how she should never have let me go. That was something I never told Rose, and especially not Mike. I pushed it all the way. It was bad enough to walk through life without her. Mike was ruthless. He had been homecoming king and thought the earth should always move for him, and many times it did. He got out of college a year early, working his way from entry level to office manager for that investment firm down in Saratoga. He bragged to me one night in a low voice during a dinner party we had both been invited to that he'd gotten the prettiest girl in town and I didn't. That he had won the greatest contest between men that went back to the age of flint axes and woolly mammoths. I told him something guttural and immature, completely making an ass of myself and forcing me to apologize to the host later. It was very guttural, but it felt so good to be immature. As I took off in my car, I vaguely realized I'd received a taste of his personality, and I was angry at how much I enjoyed it. 3 weeks before the accident, I was out at the log jam treating myself to a nice steak, staring at the empty chair across the table from me, when I heard his voice. I looked around, just hoping to see her. I cranked my head above the planter and saw him drinking a glass of beer that was most likely Canadian. He always liked showing off what he thought was his great level of cultivation. His eyes sparkled in the firelight as he drained his glass. Then he shifted a little and I dropped fast when I saw Nicole was not who he was eating with. This woman's eyes were like sapphires in the dim room. her hair a black darker than a killer's soul. He wrecked any speculation of amity by leaning over and sharing a long kiss with her. I found out that night he had been seeing this person behind Nicole's and everyone else's back for months. Not too long after, Nicole had come home sick from her job at the Hudson Valley Bank. Go with the green was their motto at the time, and caught them in bed that day. Mind cloaked with anger and hurt, she had been speeding, ran a stop sign or two, and pulled out onto Saratoga Road and got T-boned by a semi. Her funeral had been a month earlier, and the wound was beginning to scab over. I never told him that she had been talking to me on the phone when that semi plowed into her car, shattering her entire body. It gave me chills hearing her scream in the impact. Somewhere, I think I heard her body split open at that moment just before the phone went dead. The combination of a wet tearing and popping sound still haunt my dreams after all this time. I found him sitting on his porch, a cigarette between his fingers. He hadn't smoked since high school. I brought the Dodge to a stop behind his BMW. It was tempting to close my eyes and grin and ram into it a few times. I was civil. I got out, hearing the ticking sound as the Beamer's engine cooled off. Steve, he looked up at me as I got to the porch and it hit me hard. He was dead scared. He backed this up by shoving the cigarette up to his lips with his hands that shook so badly. He missed his lips twice. What's going on? In the house. I found the door open when I got home and I'm dead scared, man. He looked toward the front door and I took the bait. I wondered if I should have brought my gun. A dark smudge was on the lock, the key still procreating with it. Mike was like anyone else here. The key was under the map. He lived off Bluebird Road near the school, next to the trail. His street was a loop with houses on the outside and inside rim. He and Nicole had built a nice house with a big yard, a deck, and a pool they had to cover every winter. I tried to open the door, but something resisted it. I looked down at Mike, but he was gazing out at the lawn jockey holding the little sign designating the resident's name. He molested it with his eyes. I shrugged my shoulder into the door and saw the dirt. It was dark, nearly down to the clay, genuine New York State dirt. I'd had it on my boots and fingernails enough times to know it by heart. A trail led to the kitchen table. The Corso house reminded me of the shotgun houses I'd seen when I was down in New Orleans during the cleanup from Katrina. You could look through the front door and see the dining room in the back of the house. A smell slapped me around, shoving itself up my nose. It reminded me of the dead dog I had come across one day playing chase back in Jacoby's woods as a kid. It had left its home to go die and went to the big dog pound in the sky underneath a fallen tree. Maybe it had been there for a month. I didn't know. The flies and maggots were having an all-you-can-eat buffet on it. Then the smell of rotted meat hit my nose when the wind shifted and I threw up my PB&J sandwich at the base of a pine tree. This smell was like that. My gorge had changed with time, and I was in no danger of any upheavals. On the over-polished wood table was a scrap of paper. In Nicole's rounded scrawl was written, "Back in 15 minutes." I dropped the paper back on the table. Behind me, the screen door shut itself behind him. What do I do? People can't come back from the dead. He raised his hands in exasperation, then let them fall. No crap. I looked around the place, trying to see if anything was missing. I didn't know enough about his house to know if anything was. I told him so. He read my intentions perfectly. Nothing's gone. I checked my safe and the gun rack in the basement, but everything's tight. He threw his hands up, and I watched him surreptitiously search the room with his eyes again. They told me he wanted to be sure, and when they came back to me, I knew he was. I tried to think about all of this logically and could not pull it off. People didn't come back from the dead. My eyes fell on the picture of Nicole, her sweet smile planted on her face, caught in mid-stride as she passed through the finish line of the Ironman she had competed in a few years back. God, it still hurt after all this time. I wonder if Claire's okay. He looked down at the note again and then out the back door into the woods. Something dawned in his eyes I couldn't quite read, then jammed his hands into his pockets. He wasn't groping himself. That would have been awkward and disgusting if he had. I pulled out his smartphone. I walked to the window over the kitchen sink, brushed aside the thin white curtain, and looked out into his backyard where Nicole had diligently grown a nice vegetable garden in the fall before she died. Now it was a patch of neglected dirt in the corner of the yard, like something out of War of the Worlds. One of the Adirondack Power Company's electricity pylons stood over it from the trail. The trail had earned its title for being a place that was more or less neutral ground. The land was owned by the power company as a route for their 50-foot-tall alien-looking hunks of metal sculpture that carried power lines across the town from the station over near Hudson Falls. Most days during the spring and summer, you could step out onto the porch, turn on the Yankee game, and sip your beer, watching the occasional motocross bike or ATV zip by beneath them, leaving behind foreign patters from their tires in the soft dirt of the trail. There was no one riding out there today. It added to a deadness that made everything seem stranger. We'd said goodbye at the Green Tomato, sharing one last solemn hug before she'd gone off to become something, and the darkness had come over my life. She trusted me to handle all the details of her death in juxtaposition to the fact that she never wanted me in her life. Mike could sell the BS with the best of them. Nice guys had no place in this world. Claire? His face scrunched like it was getting squeezed, and I turned to the front window. It would be dark soon. Fall would be short. The stunted oak in his front yard was starting to get naked, its leaves at its feet. I wondered if the lawn jockey was enjoying the show and if he tipped well. Yeah, I know you told me not to call again, but something weird has happened. Has anyone come over? Another pause. I knew what was coming. Claire had been fired as a teacher when Nicole had been killed. It had come out about the affair, and local gossip had killed her career. I know it's none of my business, but I just wanted to be sure you're safe. His face contorted in disbelief. Claire? Claire? He yanked the phone away from his head, and I heard a scream. He pressed the button. Something's got Claire. I drove us over to her house on Sherrill Drive. It was a white colonial with green shutters near the apex of the loop, where it then ran back into itself. Her door was closed. Claire! Claire! He leapt up the steps to her wooden porch and pulled back her screen door and began to pound on the inside one. I looked up and could see the pylon. Then I realized that there was only a thin stretch of woods in the trail between his house and Mike's. The door moved and I walked toward it, not knowing if I should be scared or not. There were small, square, concrete bricks that made up the walkway to it. I tripped over the edge of one that had been carelessly placed in the soft dirt and caught myself. A loud slam made me jump, and I looked up at him. The screen door had slammed shut as he began to back away. His mouth was working in silence, and I thought he was going to walk off the porch, but his legs remembered how they got there, and he backed down the steps. I looked up at the door in time to see it slam shut, but not without catching sight of a ghost behind it. The black hair had turned white, eyes hollowed with madness. He staggered, then caught himself and sprinted to my car. I followed the path back along the bricks and stole a glance at her side door. More black dirt was on the steps and led out to the backyard. As I went back to my car, I realized Nicole was visiting. I slid in the car and fired it up. Let's go back to your place, call the police, and let them do their thing. There has to be a fingerprint somewhere. People can't come back from the dead. Mike's voice seemed to come from far away. She was driven mad by what she saw. Her hair has turned white. As we backed out of the driveway, I thought I heard a gunshot from inside the house. Mike was just staring out the window. I dropped him off, looked at my watch, and noticed the woods across from his house. They were too quiet. This time of year, the crickets and frogs should be conducting a symphony of their unique choosing. It had been 15 minutes since I'd arrived. She'd always been known to be late. I saw something in the dying light, something walking up the road in the near dark. I didn't look. I didn't have to. I put the Dodge into drive and drove around the loop. I saw something in the dark, a figure that was not moving like it was alive. I didn't need to see. She deserved her revenge. Mike died of a heart attack that night, screaming loud enough to get the neighbors to call 911. The next day, I got a call that the Tombs lock had been broken. Only detectives who were called couldn't figure out why it looked like it had been broken from the inside. She was right. In the end, she had gotten what she wanted. That was 15 years ago. My dog died last year of old age, so I sold my insurance business last month for a bargain basement price, and I changed my will that same day. Everything is going to my nephew in New Jersey, whom I had only ever talked to twice in my life. He'll be collecting very soon. I sit here in my chair. My gun feels good in my hand. The leaves are starting to fall again, and I have a smile I can't erase. Nicole has been coming to me in my dreams, and I can't wait anymore. I need to see her so I can get what I want. Well then. That's interesting. I don't even know what to think about that story. Like, I feel bad for the narrator, but like, damn, girl. Then again, they always say that, like, if you have, like, darkness in your heart when you pass or something traumatic happens to you as you're getting ready to die, you carry that shit with you to the grave. I don't know. It's weird. It's that weird shit, dude. I don't know. It's just kind of sad in general, you know? It's just a sad thing. All right. Let's see. Trying to find a good track for you guys. Hold on. Okay, we'll do this one. All right. So the next story is The Coldest Day. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. Bitter cold was nothing new for northern Alberta, especially not for January, and the cacophony of wind that tore through the woodlands was nothing if not wholly familiar and almost comforting to the one that huddled in the tree line, obliterated from vision by the pitch of night and the swaying arm of evergreen trees. The figure stood there for a time and simply watched, waiting, head canted ever so subtly to the left, and listened, staring into the dullness of the dimly illuminated window no more than 50 feet across the crisp layer of hardening snow that stood without a single scar, nothing to mar its pristine surface. Much like other homes throughout the reserve, a family was nestled within, and the figure could smell the promise of stew and bannock, could feel the sudden violent clench of hunger from the depths of its belly, and touch the length of flesh that gurgled so very audibly that it was near impossible to ignore, and the being halted, peering still through the window to see if they had heard the noise. The ominous growl of need its traitorous body had emitted. Life continued as per normal within those heated walls, a family sitting down to dinner, a family blissfully unaware they were being watched, evaluated. From the window, it appeared as though the house was the same as any other, that the people inside were just like every other family. However, there was something different about this family. A sense of dread, an impending doom so thick that the grandmother naturally assumed she could not only smell it in the air, but see its lingering webs in the shadows of her home. 6 families in the last month, 6 that were missing with little more than a struggle and vitae-born finger painting that had decorated the walls, and there was no one on the reserve that wasn't talking about it. 6 families to each bag a deer from the very interior of the forest. So far into the interior that the most experienced of hunters avoided it, not to mention the average white man, but times were tough and the pickings were slim. With so many out of work, it became harder and harder to feed families, and those with the proper knowledge and hunting rights were not about to let their own family, let alone people of their community, starve. Such was the Aboriginal way of life. The issue, however, was not in the hunting so much as what happened within a few moons of the original kill. The deer caught and cleaned and then brought back home to be butchered and divided among those that needed it most. It was the 3rd night after this when those that lived in the home went missing. Elders, parents, children, and grandchildren, no one was accounted for, and thinking of this caused the old woman to shudder. "Kokum, you okay?" A small voice asked, and the woman turned her attention down to the small child standing by the family table and nodded, forcing a smile, and patted the girl on the head. "You go on, my girl," she said, not feeling nearly as confident as she sounded. "Everything is just fine, and we have some time before dinner is ready. Go watch your show." It was with a gap-toothed smile that the girl kissed her grandmother's hip and fled, braid bouncing in the air behind her, and in that moment the grandmother knew true fear. The ominous air felt positively heavy, as did the heart that beat in frantic rhythm in her chest. "You're sure about this?" "Not in the slightest, but what else can we do? 6 whole families? What else could it have been?" Her son replied, setting plates upon the table as his wife entered behind him with silverware and glasses. The table itself was filled, reminding the woman of the last meal allowed to a prisoner before their time in front of the Creator. "You said yourself that something had to be done." "I didn't realize that we'd be keeping the children here instead of sending them to your wife's family." In that moment, fear sharpened her tone, anger causing her hands to tremble. "They shouldn't be here." The wife looked from mother to son, swallowing, and set the utensils upon the table. "We had no choice, and you know it," she began slowly. "It waits for the most bountiful haul of meat it can take in one hunt. What were we supposed to do? Allow another family to disappear? At least we're prepared. The others certainly weren't." "That's not the point." "It doesn't matter what the point is. It's too late." In that moment, her son ended the conversation and went back to the kitchen. It was time to bring food to the table for what could possibly be the last evening they would ever spend together. In the tree line, hungry eyes watched the 3 converse among themselves, the ever-present gurgle of its belly becoming all the more impatient. It didn't want to wait for the family to eat. The grandmother was plump and the child would be tender, succulent. It moved, taking a half step forward, and could taste something bitter in its mouth with a rush of saliva. Vomit threatened to rise up, a sudden reaction, the ravenous hunger that pulled at the creature's very being. Its soul, if it could be argued that the beast still had one. For a moment, there was a sudden rush of dizziness, and its hand rested upon the tree to its left, allowing it the briefest second of respite. A moment to shake away any other thoughts that weren't related to the hunt, and it was hard to focus on anything else. Ordinarily, the beast would have allowed them to dine first, but tonight would be different. The last family had been sick, and the meat worthless. The creature starved and could not think straight, could not consider a thing beyond the next meal presented to it. Tentatively, the first step came, foot breaking through the pristine layer of hardened snow with a subtle crunch, and its paused for just a moment while cast in the darkness of winter's early evening, and when nothing else stirred, it was followed by another and yet another. It crept closer still, impatient. They sat at the table, said their thanks, and began to eat. The deer was delicious but was hard to swallow, for the old woman was not hungry, but could not alarm the children, who ate with gusto. "Kokum! Kokum!" cried the small girl. "You're not eating!" The child frowned, and to set aside her worry, the old one took a large mouthful of potato that tasted no better than dirt in her mouth and chewed pointedly. The child watched her steadily, seemingly now suspicious of her meat, and leaned forward to sniff her dinner. "Eat your supper," the girl's mother chided. "There are plenty of people in our community who have nothing to eat tonight." It was then that first crack sounded, far louder than the sound of a car backfiring, and the child screamed in terror, grabbed by her grandmother and brought under the table with the command to hide, with her younger brother soon joining her. Two small children and a baby hiding in plain sight, while their father jumped from the table and all but flew to the door, pausing only to grab the hunting rifle that lay propped up by the frame, their grandmother unable to ignore the sound of her own terrified heartbeat in her ears. The creature had all but sprinted across the snow when the noise came. Gunfire, a single shot. In that moment, the beast froze and turned sharply, a figure in the darkness with two illuminated and pallid blue eyes that all but glowed in piss-poor light. Darkness was the friend of this creature, and overcast evenings were favored for this very reason. And there, while it stood hunched, its head lifted, and a single wet snuffling sound filled the deafening silence that had followed the shot. Gasoline. It had been so eager to feast that it hadn't bothered to scent the air around it and had been trapped. In that moment, a horrific, beastly roar filled the air before the sound of gasoline catching from a single match could whisper through the interrupted stillness. In that very moment, it was as though the temperature dropped further from a considerable cold to something both bitter and angry when the line of fire began to close in rapid succession. The beast bolted and howled when the circle of flames closed around it, illuminating the beast that stalked with rapid purpose in its trap, glaring hatefully at the men that emerged from the woods with their guns and lights. The promising meal was stolen from it and raged toward its beast, ripping from its throat with anger so great it staggered the men, save for one that sang a deeply and throaty sound accompanied by a painted hand drum that seemed to drive the beast back to the very edge of its prison. Rage seemed to give way to fear, and this bolstered the men into believing that perhaps their shaman could keep the creature at bay with nothing more than a song, the creator and his magic. The children were terrified, clinging to one another and sobbing, their mother climbing under the table after them to soothe and hold them, afraid to take them from the house to the safety of the car in a house far, far from this one in which they lived. "Stay here." The grandmother was soon moving to follow her son through, though at a much slowed pace. The rear of their house and the field behind it was nothing if not surreal, for the shadows dancing from flame and the figure that twisted itself from the man working his medicine. She moved closer to it, yet holding her heart through her breast, and willed as best she could for the pace to finally slow when she came around her boy and looked upon the face of the beast. The family that disappeared last winter? She was the only one who spoke while he sang, and the others looked to their elder in surprise. White family, she spoke, as though distracted, looking with pity upon the beast. Husband, wife, and young boy, if I remember correctly. The sheriff came to borrow some of our people to find them in the woods. All we could find was the car. We said prayers for them. I wonder which one of them she ate, said one voice. Could have been both, another chimed in. She must have been the reason that party of hunters went missing a few months ago. Hungry girl. They're always hungry. The old woman's bitter. The men realizing their impropriety in that moment and falling silent as she moved forward and cocked her head to the side. The woman, at one point, had been a dark-haired beauty, one that had her son later in life and had been easily in her mid-30s with her husband, who was still yet older, and a son no more than 3 at the time. If they were lucky, they died before she ate them. A frown formed upon that wrinkled mouth, deep-set, ebon eyes, meeting the frigid blue of the emaciated, bestial version of this woman. Twisted and malnourished, fingernails little more than claws and teeth broken so they could tear meat that much more effectively. Gone was the pallor of humanity in her flesh, and instead it was replaced with a gray that was reserved usually for mushrooms only. An impressive sight, even as it began to lie in the snow, covering its ears and whimpering as best an abomination could. It was strange to feel pity for the beast that had killed so many, but it too had once been human, had once been loved, and for that the old woman could feel pain and look at the creature with tears obscuring her regard. Well, I think we need to discuss what to do with it. What do you think we do? We kill it. Yeah, seems like the only way to know for sure that it's gone. We can't kill it, the son interrupted, sighing. It's not the flesh we need to fear. That only holds the spirit. You can't kill the Wendigo. The spirit lives forever and is always hungry. If we kill it, then it will go free and torment another. He looked to his mother, resting a large and callous hand on her shoulder. It will go with the others. It was then the tears fell, the old woman crying openly and turning from the thing before her, turning away from her son, and fled to the safety of the house behind her. The others had fallen silent in that moment, out of respect for their elder, and looked to one another. Do we even have room for another? Just this one. We need to build another place to house them. Jesus Christ, Frank, we can't keep them caged. Someone's going to die when they get loose. If they get loose. It doesn't matter. We're trying to end the spirit here. The man, Frank, said, sounding as though exhausted, and watched his mother into the house to be with his wife and children. Damn woman wouldn't listen when we told them not to go that way. We were just stupid Indians that didn't know as much as her GPS, and now she learned the hard way and we have to clean up her mess. Headlights could be seen from the front of the house. Someone arriving at the house, and feet crunching in the snow while another elder emerged, carrying a cast iron collar on a length of iron wood. They would collar the creature and lead her much like cattle. A secondary staff was in his left hand, fashioned with a hook that would secure to another loop in order to have 2 men lead the exceptionally willful and quick beast to where they wanted it to go. Frank stepped away from the others and tried to block out the sounds of the captured creature being collared and ready for transportation through the woods to the cave where it would be kept from this day forward. The shaman stopped his song instead, handing an iPod to the young man who would fit the earbuds into the ear of the creature to listen to songs that had been recorded for this reason exactly. It had happened so many times that now they could stop thinking, could simply go through the motions, and for that Frank was grateful, remembering the first time he had done exactly this. Back in those days, the shaman stayed and there was comfort to be had in that. You all right, boy? He was asked and looked at Paul. Paul had been there for his first and now looked so old. I will be. Go stay with Mom and Nadine. I'll be back as soon as I can. He forced a smile, patted the old man on the shoulder, and stepped away to take up the second staff and lock it into place. Let's go, he nodded, his partner ahead, taking up the rear of the beast. It seemed like they walked for hours in the frigid cold to the locked gate that sat upon a naturally formed cave, one that was dug clearly into the wall of the mountain and had no exit. Hopefully, still had no exit, as one could enter to check. A sigil was painted above the cave, a malformed skull of sorts with Cree glyphs painted along with it. She, the creature, he corrected himself, recoiled from it as he opened the gate and released his staff from the lock. Push it in. It was easier if you didn't think of them as being human once upon a time. Always easier. He took up the remaining staff with the other man and shoved hard, pushing this poor white woman through the cage door as she shrieked and convulsed, only to fall to the ground and began vomiting a foul-smelling bile upon the stone. Frank kicked the cell door closed and fashioned the lock into place. The warding would work for only so long before someday failing, and when it did, be damned if the reservation wasn't going to have at least some time to evacuate. May the Creator ease your pain and forgive your mistake. Hunger does strange things to people, he whispered, looking at the snow beneath his feet. I hope it wasn't your son that made you this way. A growl was heard, weak from the depths of the cage, another set of pale eyes staring from the darkness before the now desiccated creature moved forward and hissed lazily at him. A face much like his own if it had been born from a nightmare. Hi, Dad. 30 years almost to the day, and the monster hadn't aged a year. Not 1 year. I don't know how you can manage to come out here every time. It's like he knows you're coming and is trying to figure out where he wants to bite first. The other man, Trevor, shuddered despite himself. 30 years of starving, why else would it look like that at me? It's not like he knew me, I was just a baby. Frank shrugged. Maybe this guy wasn't named Trevor. He couldn't really bring himself to care, to be honest. Now, I'm just dinner. You accept it, deal with it, and move on. Eventually they'll die, maybe, who knows. It was bleak to think about, and even worse when he turned to look at his father. The woman, now rising herself and realizing what had happened almost instantly, began throwing herself at the cage with a shriek. Angry, fearful. Nothing that was new to him. Just like they all do this. It's like watching old shows. You know what's going to happen because they never deviate. Never. A shake of his head and he sighed, stepping back. You know, it shouldn't bother me at all. I didn't know the guy, but it broke my mother. She still misses him. Sometimes she comes to look at his face. I keep telling her not to, but she does. Old woman is never going to learn, but she says he was the love of her life. If it were Nadine, I'd want her to move on, you know? Frank rambled. He always rambled. It was just how he coped with what he saw, with what he volunteered to do. Sometimes you just can't fucking win. Am I right or am I right? He turned away then and saw the darkness on the snow first, brow furrowing in confusion. There was enough light to make sure that they didn't have these shadows and they shouldn't have appeared like splatter patterns. Trev? His eyes scanned ahead to the fallen man on the ground, his throat having been ripped out so quickly he hadn't had time for a death rattle, and upon his chest, a small figure no bigger than his own son of about 2.5. Suddenly, he felt sick and acceptance all at once. Frank was trapped. He would never be able to outrun this tiny creature that would likely tire him before he could make it that kilometer home. In this moment, he knew he was done. He knew there was nothing he could do, and the sound of hungry screams did nothing to lessen the blow behind him. One cry, however, was almost joyous, relieved. It was hard to describe as the female threw herself against the cage door to no avail, time and time again. Well, kid, I wish she had loved you enough to eat you. The immortal Wendigo child turned to him, a mouth full of blood and meat, dripping from his small and broken maw while he stared at Frank. For a moment, it was as though a stalemate began to declare itself, and then it pounced. Wet slurping filled the cold night. The child ate like it had never eaten before. The meat was good, healthy. It felt good between his teeth and sliding down his throat. He played with his meal as all children do, beaming at his mother when he turned to show her the puppet he'd made out of his second kill's skull before pushing it forward with a soft croon. His mother whistled softly in the night to him, a lullaby that was for him only, while trying to push a hand out from between the bars, and found that she could not. So close and yet too so far from the son she kept alive for this long. The song turned sad, and she found herself lying down, face pressed to the stone, and her son soon mimicking the pose she held, but out in the snow where she could not reach him. His tiny hand reaching for her, but paused mere inches from her own, and together they lay, singing softly to one another, waiting for the mark above the cave to simply wear with time. That was an interesting Wendigo story. Also, good night, two geeky gamers. Take it easy. Glad you could stop through. I know it's late for you. Well then, we got one more on the plate. One more for me, mostly just so I can rest my voice. Give me a moment. All right, give me one moment, guys. Play a little music for you. All right, I'm back. Sorry about that, guys. Alrighty. Here's an oldie but goodie. Next up is the Harbinger experiment. Feel free to read along as we dive into this. Hope you're ready. All right, here we go. The world we live in is full of things we don't understand. Being the curious humans that we are, we naturally try and seek these things out. Doing so has led us to remarkable discoveries and inventions that we never could have imagined 100 years ago. We have defeated disease, built to the sky itself, and even created machines that could take us beyond the clouds and into the stars. If our ancestors could see us and what we have created, I'm sure many of them would see us as gods. Our innate curiosity and lust for knowledge has not always led us to greatness, however. True evil and darkness have also been uncovered in humanity's conquest of knowledge. And in the end, I fear this evil will be our doom. I do not say this from the standpoint of a great philosopher who has sat and simply pondered things either. No, I say this because I have seen it, experienced it. I was a part of it. The event I'm about to relay to you is true in its entirety. This I swear. I feel certain that this will fall on deaf ears, and many of you will believe this to be just another spooky story meant to give you cheap thrills, but I promise you that this is neither my intent nor my purpose. The purpose of this story is to simply warn you of what lurks beyond the veil of what we can see and understand, to show you what awaits us in the darkness, even if I myself don't understand it. What I'm about to tell you has happened, and I feel certain it will happen again. In 1971, a not-so-well-known scientist began preparations for an extremely secretive project known simply as the Harbinger experiment. I would like to keep the identity of the scientist a secret for personal reasons, so throughout this recounting, I will refer to him as Zimmermann. Zimmermann's background is unclear at best beyond 1971. All that is known about him before that time is that he had grown up somewhere in Maryland with a strange fascination of the occult and supernatural. This later made him an outcast among his fellow scientists due to how scoffed upon the metaphysical was, and still is, at the time. Zimmermann's opinions concerning the otherworldly were not the sole cause for him being an outcast, though. It was his methods that made him widely unacceptable among his peers. Zimmermann was well known during his time for being ruthless and cold beyond measure. He never cared about the means. All that mattered to him was results, and if he predicted the results to be valuable enough, anything would be worth obtaining them. It was this insatiable and brutal lust for the truth that made him feared among those that knew of him. And the few that knew of him and did not fear him believed in him and followed him and his work closely. The word harbinger itself has such a mysterious and intimidating taste to it. Maybe it's the way it rolls from our tongues, or maybe it's simply due to its association with the project, but the word always seems to carry a certain amount of doom with it, which would make sense. The word itself means to warn or forebode. I can't imagine Zimmermann's reason for giving the experiment this title, but in retrospect, it fits perfectly. Zimmermann came to a select few, me being one of them. He told us he was working on something big and that he needed people who could keep confidentiality and not spread idle gossip of his work. While he did not fully trust some of us, he did know that we were professionals and that for some reason or another, we were all in dire need of employment. I had worked at the local clinic as a doctor, but I was caught stealing medication and was promptly fired. This left a very dark mark on my resume, so work was hard to find. I was also a native to Alaska and lived near where the experiment would take place, so I guess you could say I was a convenient choice. As you can imagine, I jumped at the opportunity. It was hard not to when I saw the payout. 15 of us were hired in total. Some were colleagues of his that has been working with him for a while, some were maintenance workers, and a few were hired as private security. I was the only medical professional to be hired. It is still a wonder to me how he even attained the funds necessary for the experiment. I would not be wholly surprised if his financing was not entirely legal. But, legal or not, I needed the money and he was paying. Looking back, it's a decision I have come to regret. After Zimmerman obtained his money, he used it to buy a relatively large plot of land deep in the frozen wilderness of Alaska. And upon the piece of land, Zimmerman built a concrete structure not dissimilar to a bunker, in fact. The sole difference being that its goal was to keep any potential damage contained within the structure rather than keeping it out, as he put it. Most of the structure dug underneath the earth, which had the effect of making the underground complex seem so much smaller than it really was from the outside, as would be expected. There was only one way of entering and leaving the underground structure, and it was via a ladder that led from a small, unassuming concrete building on the surface, which I will refer to from now on as the entrance building for convenience, to the network below. After everyone had gone to bed at night, the hatch that contained the ladder would be sealed off with a very large and thick metal lid. Zimmerman was very strict about this. Located not too far away from the entrance building was a series of wooden cabins that would serve as the sleeping quarters for the staff Zimmerman had hired. Compared to entrance buildings standing on the surface, the underground system was massive. At the center of the complex was the control room. This is where all the facilities, electronics, and such were linked to. This included security cameras, lights, and door controls. Consoles, monitors, and computers lined the walls of this large central chamber. This is also where the ladder in the entrance building connected to in the underground complex. Connected to the control room were 3 doors. One led to a smaller room that served as the infirmary. Another door led to a break room, and the last door led into the hallways. The hallways are where the complex began to feel extremely eerie. They were for some reason laid out in an extremely confusing scheme that led in circles and to complete dead ends. These hallways made up a vast majority of the complex, and it would be very easy to get lost in the maze if you were unfamiliar with the complex. But if you knew where you were going, you would find yourself standing before one of 3 8-by-8-foot rooms before long. Each room had a camera hooked up to one of the corners of the room, and all 3 of those cameras were connected to a corresponding monitor in the control room. Cameras were also scattered throughout the hallway so that whoever was watching their corresponding monitor could see anywhere they wanted to, when they wanted to. Thick metal doors stood at the entrance to each of the 3 8-by-8-foot rooms, and in order to open them, you would have to enter a 4-digit code into a panel located near the door. I remember when I first arrived at the complex how badly the hallways had frightened me. I have always been claustrophobic, you see, and those hallways were so very narrow. The noise, or more accurately, the lack of noise, was also a tremendous source of fear for me in those bleak, narrow hallways. It was always so unnaturally silent, as if the entire world had stopped moving. It really made you feel like you were trapped down there. Thankfully, though, I only rarely ventured into those hallways, for I was the only medical professional in the facility, and I had virtually no reason to go into them. In the beginning, I found it so peculiar that Zimmerman would ask for a medical professional like me on a project like this, but by the time it was all over, I understood why. The official purpose of the Harbinger experiment was to test and observe the effects of extended isolation on the human mind. This is what was listed on reports being sent out at least. But unbeknownst to all those who were not participating in the project, excluding the subjects, the true purpose was much darker. Like I said before, Zimmerman had always had an obsession with the occult and supernatural. He sought to prove himself to those who did not believe in him. He wanted physical proof that the supernatural was a real phenomenon, and he wanted to be the first one to attain said proof. The true purpose of the Harbinger experiment was to find proof of the metaphysical, a world we could not see.
The thought of doing this was naturally a tad bit daunting and even scary, but it was Zimmerman's method of doing so that was truly terrifying. Zimmerman believed that he would be able to open a portal between worlds momentarily, allowing 3 random entities to cross over to our world, and each one of these beings would be trapped within one of the 3 rooms. Zimmerman had the theory that any entity would try and latch onto the nearest living thing that had the capacity for it. He wanted to use this technique to trap a spirit in a physical form by allowing it to enter a living being that had been injected with the compound mixture of Zimmerman's creation. In theory, this compound would keep the entity from simply leaving whatever it was attached to. The only way it would be able to leave a host who had been injected with the compound was through death. According to Zimmerman, the host would have to be something living with a will strong enough to survive the possession. And there is only one known species that possessed the amount of will required for this: humans. Zimmerman had also done something to ensure that the entities would only enter the 3 rooms and that there would only be one entity in each room, though I cannot say I know what exactly he did. In fact, I know next to nothing when it comes to how Zimmerman managed to do what he did. He liked to keep his methodology a secret to his most trusted and himself, most likely due to his paranoia that someone would steal his ideas and take credit for the success of said ideas. If I had known that this was the true purpose before I signed up, I may have reconsidered. But Zimmerman decided not to tell us until we were all gathered at his fortress. Even if any of us wanted to leave, I doubt we would have been allowed to do so. The security team Zimmerman had hired was loyal to him in the payout. It is not unlikely that Zimmerman had given them the order to not allow anyone to leave. There were 3 different subjects included in the experiment. All were native to Alaska, and each one was lured into the project under the belief that they would be participating in a harmless study of the effect of isolation on the human mind, as I mentioned before. Which is why none of the subjects objected when they realized that they would be confined to one of the 3 rooms that I mentioned earlier. The first subject was a young man. He was apparently out of work and desperately needed the money that had been offered for participating in the study. The second was a woman. By looking at her, I could tell she was an addict of some sort. The third and final subject was an older man, a drifter if I had to guess. One thing that they all had in common was that none of them had any family or friends left. In short, no one would miss them, which is why they were chosen for the project. I am sorry. I wish I could supply more information about the subjects, but all of this has been drawn from memory, and I was given little information on the 3 to begin with. The experiment did not officially begin until 1987, 16 years after its original announcement. I was eager to begin, so I packed up and headed out of the complex as soon as I could. I arrived at the compound a week before the subjects had even signed up, and a whole month before the project even began. I was not the first to arrive by any means. When I got there, Zimmerman, his colleagues, and the security team had already arrived. I suppose you could say I was the first among the people Zimmerman did not trust to arrive. Everyone had arrived about a week before the experiment began. There was a noticeable rift between those who were there simply for the money, like me, and those who were followers of Zimmerman. On October 15, 1987, all the preparations were in place. The subjects had been sealed in their rooms, the cameras, lights, and speakers were fully operational, and all the staff members had settled in. The time had come for the experiment to officially begin. Zimmerman asked everyone to report to the control room around 9 p.m. to witness the beginning of the experiment. He wanted everyone to be present when he proved that all his theories had been correct and that he was not just a madman. He wanted us all to see the fruits of his labor. When everyone had finally gathered in the large control room, Zimmerman turned to us and simply said, "Observe." He then turned his back to us, leaned into the microphone that would project his voice through the 3 rooms, and then he began chanting in a strange language that I feel certain no one but Zimmerman could understand. We all observed the 3 large monitors on the wall, silently waiting for something to happen. The subjects all stood in their room, dumbstruck by Zimmerman's chanting, staring at the monitors with confused expressions on their faces. After about 5 minutes, I felt something awful. I cannot explain what exactly it was, but a horrible feeling of dread washed over me, riddling me with fear. It was then that the ground actually began to shake subtly and the lights began to flicker. Zimmerman continued chanting into the microphone as if nothing was off or wrong, while the subjects began dashing around their rooms, screaming for help. Then suddenly the ground stopped shaking and the monitor's image turned into static. The air began to become very heavy as we all stared at the monitors, waiting for them to regain their image and show us what was happening or had happened in those 3 rooms. For a while all was silent, but then there was screaming. The screams of a woman going through unbearable pain and terror began to echo throughout the compound. The similar screams of men began to coincide with the woman's terrified screams, and together they mixed into an awful symphony of pain and fear that beat mercilessly into our ears. Those of us who were here for the money began to give each other scared looks, while those loyal to Zimmerman seemed completely unfazed. We wanted to leave and never come back to this awful place, but we all knew deep down that Zimmerman would never allow that to happen. We were here for the long haul. There was no escape. To reveal to us what had occurred in those 3 rooms. As soon as the screaming ended, Zimmerman stood and dismissed us all for the night, adding that we were all forbidden to come back into the compound until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Not like any of us wanted to. We all solemnly made our way out of the compound and towards the cabins and settled in for the night. I feel it is safe to say that not all of us slept well that night, and I was not one of them. The following morning, all of the staff had arrived at the entrance building. We all stood inside, exchanging tired or nervous looks as we waited for Zimmerman to arrive, and opened the hatch that concealed the ladder. I could see palpable fear in the eyes of some of us, while others did not seem to have been even remotely affected by what happened last night. Zimmerman showed up 5 minutes after 10, apologizing for his tardiness as he came through the door of the entrance building. He opened the hatch and, without any hesitation, began descending the ladder downwards into the black abyss. He almost seemed enthusiastic. I was the first to follow behind Zimmerman's dark descent into the facility. It seemed that the farther I climbed down, the more the darkness closed in on me, as if it were trying to swallow me whole. And as I climbed deeper, I couldn't help but feel that this place was different somehow. While before there was only the unsettling concrete hallways and rooms, now there was something else. Something made the eeriness feel so real and personified. I feel like a horrible and gruesome scene awaited us down there, but I continued climbing downward despite my fear and my hesitation. This was no longer just a spooky bunker. There was darkness and malevolence in the air. A true evil now lived here, and I could feel it. We all could. I finally felt my foot touch ground and let out a silent sigh of relief to be on solid ground. Almost as if on cue, the light bulbs came alive, dousing the room in their warmth and welcome light. Zimmerman must have turned on the power, I thought. I allowed myself to take a couple of seconds to examine the control room. It was exactly as we had left it last night, for which I gave a silent and thankful prayer. It was almost as if nothing unusual had ever happened. I shook myself from my thoughts as I remembered the static-filled monitors from the night before. I let my eyes slowly make their way towards the monitors on the wall, anticipating the grim and fearful scenes that would be on them. My attention was first grabbed by monitor 1 and 3, which were still pure static. It would have been a small relief, but then the motionless image on monitor 2 caught my eye. Room 2 was entirely still and everything seemed entirely untouched. I couldn't help but gasp as I noticed the only thing that was different. The woman lay in the center of the small concrete room. An expression of fear and terror was frozen into her gaunt face as she lay silent and lifeless on her back. Zimmerman's expression turned angry when he saw this. He ordered that second monitor be turned off, and it was. We didn't ask why. It's not like any of us wanted to see the dreadful scene any longer. He also ordered that if the images in monitors 1 and 3 did not return within the next 2 hours, the security team would be sent to investigate the rooms. The security team nodded at hearing this. They made it seem as if they had no fear, but I could see it in their eyes. The subtly loud tick-tock of the clock was the only sound that echoed through the entire control room while I stared at the monitors. An hour and 50 minutes had gone by, and static was still all that occupied monitor 1 and 3. All of the other staff members were working except me. This was due to the fact that the project had been completely injury-free thus far, so I essentially had nothing to do but wait for someone to hurt themselves. Zimmerman, a couple of his colleagues, and I were the only ones that occupied the room. They quietly chatted amongst each other on the other side of the room, while I spent my entire time reading and pondering the situation I currently found myself in. I had clearly made a mistake coming here. The corpse lying in room 2 was evidence enough of this, and God only knew what awaited us in rooms 1 and 3. My thoughts were soon interrupted as monitor 3's image returned. The clear image now displayed on the screen made everyone's eyes noticeably widen. What was displayed on the monitor was horrifying. A humanoid thing stood in the center of the room staring directly at the camera, unmoving. It was wearing the jumpsuit that Subject 3 had been issued, but this clearly was not the same man that had entered the room. What caught my attention first were its eyes. They were solid black and twice the size of normal human eyes. They seemed so endless and so cold. Its head had also grown with the eyes in such a symmetrical and unsettling manner. The being had also shed all of the hair it once had, and even from the monitor I could see how unnaturally smooth and clear its skin was. It had also seemingly grown in height and stature, which could be seen in the fact that the jumpsuit was now obviously far too small for its wearer. Its limbs had grown especially long. Its arms hung almost as low as the creature's knees. What we were looking at was in no way the same man we had sent inside. Fear. Fear was all I felt as I continued to stare into the monitor at the thing in the room. And my fear seemed to be shared by those around me, which made me feel kind of good. It may sound awful, but it was a tad bit satisfying to see that Zimmerman and his colleagues could feel fear also. But at the same time, it was worrying because this showed that this was not part of Zimmerman's plan. Something had gone wrong. We all stared into the monitor at the thing despite our fear. It was almost as if we were in a trance. My already present fear began to grow and spread rapidly through my body as I became lost in the creature's eyes, trapped in its terrifyingly hypnotic gaze. After what felt like forever, I managed to break eye contact with the creature and divert my attention from the monitor, and when I did so, I felt my fear levels drop considerably. After a short while, Zimmerman ordered his security team to make their way to Subject 1's doors just as he said he would do. The security team left without question, armed only with batons and pistols. I focused my attention on watching the men progress through the hallways towards Subject 1's room via the cameras. Even though the not-so-high-quality cameras, it wasn't hard to tell that these men were afraid of what awaited them. Their heads were downcast as they walked. They did not possess the same confidence within them that they had when this project began. They looked like scared boys being sent off to a terrible war. Eventually, they made it to the door. We had perfect vision of them in the door via the hallway camera. One of them said something through one of their walkie-talkies and made a motion towards the camera. In response, one of Zimmerman's colleagues buzzed the door open. The men already had their pistols out by the time the button was pushed. Slowly, the door began to open. We all watched eagerly as the men began to approach the door, guns aimed inside. Suddenly, and without warning, there was a loud shriek, and as something bounded out of the room at the men, the monitor turned into static. Immediately, we could hear screaming echoing down the hallways, followed shortly after by the distinct sound of gunshots. We could do nothing but wait. After a couple of minutes, the screaming and gunshots stopped. We all waited and prayed, hoping that whatever bounded at them from the room would not be the one to return to the control room. After a couple more minutes, 3 of the men came back, carrying with them the corpse of the 4th. He had had massive cuts covering his chest, and his face was shredded. You couldn't even tell who he was anymore, or even that he was human. I was used to gore being a doctor and all, so I felt somewhat unfazed by the mass of shredded flesh and bloodied meat they carried with them. But many of the others went pale and vomited. The security team all wore motionless expressions and eyes filled with terror. One of the men finally looked up at us. He stared at us for a while with those wide eyes of his. "It's dead," he finally managed to mutter in a shaken and scared voice. A couple of hours went by. The dead man's name was Frank. He was buried outside in the cold Alaskan ground. 2 of the men were unharmed, physically at least. The 3rd was alive, but only barely. His body was covered in bloody slashes, and one of his eyes had been gouged out. I managed to stabilize him, but only just. The other 2 men vaguely explained what happened. Apparently, Subject 1 leaped out at Frank after the door had opened, only it wasn't really Subject 1 anymore. According to them, it had a hideously contorted face and long, sharp claws. They claimed to have shot it over a dozen times before it finally died. And then they emptied another dozen bullets into it just to be sure it was really dead. Only once it was dead did they come back. After tending to the wounded man, I went to investigate the monitors. As afraid as I was of seeing what those monitors may hold, I needed to see. Subject 3 was the only one left now, and I needed to see it and make sure the creature was still in his room. It seemed to me more like a jail cell than an ordinary room at this point, though, which was probably a good thing. The cameras displaying Subject 1's room and the hallway outside it still displayed a static-filled screen. No one was sent to repair them or investigate. We just had to hope that the Subject 1 was well and truly dead. Monitor 3's image was exactly the same as I had left it. Subject 3 was still staring directly into the camera at us. He was still in the exact same position, and if it were not for the small fan in the corner of the room, I would think I was looking at a still image. In a way, I felt relief at seeing this. Relief that he was still in his room and had not escaped while no one was looking. After everything had quieted down, I noticed something especially unusual. There was a strange sound emanating from somewhere. At first it was barely noticeable. The only reason I heard it was because of how extremely quiet it was in the infirmary. But as time went by, it slowly began to increase in volume. After about an hour, it was loud enough that everyone else could hear it too. And after a couple more hours, its volume had increased so much that we could determine what the noise was. It was a song. One of the staff members identified it as "Living in the Sunlight" by Tiny Tim. Apparently, his father loved the song and listened to it frequently. The song seemed to be on a loop and kept replaying itself. Although we were able to identify the noise, we remained unable to identify its source. We knew that it wasn't coming from the speakers because we had turned them off. It seemed to be emanating from the walls themselves. More time ticked by as we all began to become increasingly agitated by the song. I spent most of my time in the infirmary attending to Frank or in the control room. Fear hung in the air, and the presence of unmistakable darkness and evil was no doubt its source. Subject 3 still had not moved. He had kept his unblinking gaze fixed on the camera the entire time. It always felt like he was staring directly at me, no matter where I was in the room. I think this effect was also felt by others due to the fact that they seemed to move around the room a lot, and for seemingly no reason. After a few hours, the song was so loud that people almost had to shout in order to communicate. We had been trying to find its source so that we could turn the song off, but it was to no avail. The source was completely unidentifiable. This added a level of extreme irritation to our already very present fear. It was around 8:30 that the ground itself began to shake once again, just as it had done the previous night. Panic began to spread among my fellow employees and I as the shaking grew in intensity. During this, I had the sudden instinctual feeling to look over at Subject 3's monitor. It was gone. Almost as if on cue, the power went out. And thankfully, the song did as well. Ever since the security team came back, panic had been slowly building up among the staff, and Zimmerman was powerless to stop it. When those lights went out, the calm projections that everyone had been trying to maintain left us, and the fear in all of our hearts took over. The emergency backup lights kicked on shortly after the power went out, which I gave a silent, thankful prayer. The lights were dim, but they still allowed me to see a lot. Total panic seized us as many of my fellow staff members began screaming and rushing to the ladder in an attempt to escape. But too many were trying to use it at once, and no one was able to get very far on the ladder without someone else pulling them to the floor and taking their place. Zimmerman was shouting for everyone to calm down, but his dominating and intimidating personality had no effect here, and his demands fell upon deaf ears. It was total chaos. It wasn't long until people actually started hurting each other in their desperate attempts to get up that ladder and out of this place. I could only stand against the wall and wait for my opportunity to escape up the ladder. All the screams were soon silenced as the familiar hum of that unsettling song began to rise in volume again, only much quicker this time. And this time, it was clear that the noise was coming directly from the maze-like corridors. People stopped fighting and shouting as all our attention shifted to the door that led into the hallways. The song quickly got louder than it had ever been before, which forced many of us to cup our ears with our hands in an attempt to silence the noise. Then, suddenly, the song just completely stopped. Silence. That was all that filled the room as we all stared at the thick metal door in anticipation for what was coming. It felt like ages had gone by, but in reality, it was probably only seconds before the silence was broken. The door suddenly and violently burst open, and the music started again, louder than it had ever been before. The suddenness and the volume of this caused many of us to recoil by falling to the ground and grabbing our ears in an attempt to block out the noise. I glanced up for just a second, and in the doorway stood a tall, smooth-skinned figure with long limbs and eyes so dark and malevolent that you could clearly see them in the dim lighting. After I got my bearings, I looked upwards at the creature once again, just in time to see the thing pick up and rip Zimmerman in half in one fluid movement, dousing the room and everyone in it with his blood, intestines, and organs. I was no stranger to gore, but the sight of that was too much for me to bear. I hunched over immediately after seeing this and vomited all over the cold cement floor. That ladder is my only hope of survival, I thought to myself as I forced myself to a standing position. and as my eyes rose along with the rest of me, I could see the thing ripping and tearing through the people as they scattered in an attempt to escape it. It was distracted, and as awful as it sounds, this was my only chance to get up that ladder. I forced my legs to move towards the ladder, trying to block out the terrified screams of my fellow staff members and the unbearably loud music. I could hear gunshots coinciding with the screams and terrible sounds of flesh being ripped apart somewhere in the mess of noise. I reached my hands outwards and felt a wave of relief wash over me as my fingers came into contact with the hard metal rungs of the ladder. I gripped them and began to climb upwards as quickly as I could in my disoriented state, all the while praying that the monster would not see me and pull me off the ladder and back into the slaughter. It felt like at any moment I would feel one of its smooth hands wrap around my ankles and pull me to my death, but I eventually made it to the top. There was no question in my mind. I had to close the hatch and seal that thing down there, even if it meant certain death for my colleagues. I could not allow that thing to escape. I gripped the thick metal lid and began to push with all my might in an attempt to seal the underground complex off. Despite how dense and sturdy it was, the lid was surprisingly easy to move, and it did not take very much effort to push it over the hatch, even in my weakened state. In seconds, the hatch was completely covered by the dense metal lid. I collapsed on my side and began to vomit some more as exhaustion overtook me. And as I lay there, I realized something. Aside from my labored breaths, the only thing I could hear was the faint echo of that song from down below. I felt as though I would lose more of my sanity if I continued to lay there and listen to that song, so I once again forced myself to my feet and began to make my way to the wooden lodge I had stayed in the previous night. It was where I had left my baggage and also where I had left the keys to my truck. Of the 15 staff members that took part in the Forsaken experiment, I am the only one who survived. I have never returned to that awful place where all of this happened, and I don't intend to. The project was very secretive, and Zimmerman was the only one who knew all the details of it. And as far as I know, no one is aware of my involvement aside from me. In fact, I am probably the only one who knows what the Harbinger experiment truly was, let alone what actually happened. By now, you are probably wondering why I've told all of you about something none of you should be aware of. Maybe you're expecting me to give you a speech about not messing with things you don't understand or something along those lines. I hope not, for I have no speech to give or lesson to impart. I began hearing a noise earlier today. Almost immediately, I recognized the noise as a very haunting and familiar song. I didn't even try to trace it to its source. I knew it would be pointless. And as the day has progressed, the song has increased in volume. It's loud enough now that I can very clearly make out the lyrics. I am completely unable to escape Tiny Tim's voice. It has followed me everywhere I have gone. Subject 3 is coming for me, and I know my time left in this world is extremely limited now. I guess you could say that I just wanted to tell the tale of the Harbinger experiment before it was lost forever. I hope that you will take some lesson from what I have recounted to you, but I think we both know you won't. Let's be honest, you don't believe a word of what I've just told you, and I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe me if I were you. To you, this is nothing more than something to get your cheap thrills from. You were probably mindlessly surfing the internet when you clicked a link and found yourself here, wherever here may be, listening to this story. And to be honest, I don't care if you believe me or not. Even if you do, it probably won't stop you from trying to uncover the truth of a darkness that few of us have ever seen. It certainly never stopped Zimmerman. If you want a lesson, look at what happened to him when he went seeking the truth. I pray that none of you will ever discover this truth. I pray that none of you ever have to see the evil I have seen. I hope you all get to live in ignorance of what lies beyond the veil of what we can understand. It's here now. I can feel its black eyes burning into me just as I could all those years ago. I am as much to blame as Zimmerman for the monstrosity that is now free to roam the world, even if I was not the one to create it. I'm sorry. Please, forgive me.
Oh, goodness me. All right, guys. And that's it for tonight. I hope everyone had a great time. I hope everyone enjoyed the stories. It was always good to see you. And, well, we're going to end it here. I think it was another successful stream. Thank you, everybody who were able to stop by. Sorry I couldn't say bye to the people who left. I was a little busy, reading. But yeah, this was fun. I always enjoy hanging out with you guys and spending some time and reading stories. It's my favorite thing to do. I am currently working on a series. I know I might have told you guys this before. I plan on trying to get the videos out next week. Look forward to a new series. And, well, let's just say it has something to do with some emails. And that's pretty much the only hint you're getting. But yeah, thank you guys again so much for stopping through. It means the world to me. I appreciate you, my Hellions, for always, just being there for me. I mean it. I probably don't say it enough, and if I don't, well, here's me saying it now. I appreciate you all from the bottom of my heart. So yeah, I'll see you guys next week. Until next time. Bye!